Hello everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay podcast. And today I'm joined by historian and writer Stephen Mullen. Hello Stephen.
Hello there.
Thanks for doing this.
No problem, it's a pleasure.
And last summer we recorded Louise and Jude to do with the Empire Café, which was held during the Commonwealth Games, and you were kind of, well, a big part of that. Can you just talk, we'll talk more about the Empire Café later on, but just talk about your role in it to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose the grand title I had was historical advisor, and as Louise says, I was their historian. I was the Empire Café historian, so
Right.
So it was really good for me to be involved, you know, and just to speak a little about my research into Glasgow's involvement with New World slavery. So it was just really providing expertise on that, and you know, talking firstly the first part of it was, you know, obviously they brought a lot of poets and, you know, artists from different Caribbean countries, so I had a remit to you know, identify countries that Scotland had involvement with slavery.
Sure.
So it went on for them.
So, I mean, they were bringing over the kind of cultural aspect, but you were putting it in historical context.
Yeah, certainly there was definitely a degree of rigour in what they were doing as well. You know, it was a really important public engagement exercise, but you know, it was grounded in empirical research.
So, when the first time I heard your name was to do with the book It Wisnae Us, The Truth About Glasgow and Slavery, and that, well, tell us how you started that book. I know it's to do with your study already, but how did the book come about?
Really, that was the predecessor to everything I do.
Right.
Basically, I had done a history degree in 2005, the University of Strathclyde, and had finished and went back to my old job with my dad.
Right.
He was a joiner, so we were fitting windows. And that was what I did when I left school and stuff. So my dad was a joiner, really. I was just the gopher.
Aye.
I feel like. So I did that when I finished the degree, and then I was looking about for something to do. I mean, what do you do with a history degree, you know?
Okay.
And seen a job advertised, University of Strathclyde's career website. They were looking for just a history graduate to come in and do some research on Glasgow and the slave trade.
Okay.
So I had no idea of Glasgow's involvement, which seems almost ridiculous now, since we're at university almost in the merchant city.
Aye.
But you know, I never had any understanding about Glasgow's colonial past.
But
so
I think that's incredibly common. I think most people are, you know, listening to this.
well, hence the title, It Wisnae Us. You know, you think it is a peculiarly English problem.
Sure.
So the project was a national lottery project funded and for a wee organisation, Glasgow Building Preservation Trust, and they just wanted to, I wrote a wee exhibition for them, did some research on the streets, you know, some of the most prominent tobacco lords and West India merchants, produced like a wee heritage guide for them as well, and did some tours. It was an event we put on it was the bicentennial of the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act in 2007, so really it was structured around about that. But then at the end of it they said, do you think you could write a book?
Wow.
And naively I just said aye, you know, I think we can make this work. I already had the basis of it, you know, the core of the research was there, and the editor was Neil Baxter, Royal Corporation of Architects in Scotland, so we kept it, you know, sort of building a heritage but also the social history. So
looking at that, because the book itself has got some fantastic pictures and illustrations of a lot of the buildings in this area, in the Merchant City area.
Well, that's what we really tried to do. I mean, from an academic historian's point of view, there's nothing new there.
Right.
So it was really about taking existing research, you know, and putting it to a new medium, you know, and connecting the story, you know, so bringing it up to date with the most recent research on Glasgow's involvement with the slave trade, as well as just putting a new interpretation on the involvement of the tobacco lords and the West India merchants, how they put the money into the city, you know, the built heritage, the landed estates, and we wanted to make it look good.
Yeah.
You know, so an important part was collaboration with the Mitchell Library, and used a lot of their fantastic images.
Yeah.
So it was really, it's a primer. I feel like, you know, it's about getting people involved. I'm told undergraduates cite it quite a lot, which is pleasing. I've spoke at my old school, St Aidan's in Wishaw. They come up, and one of the history teachers said it really influenced her, and I went up and spoke to the kids, which was great, since they chased me out of St Aidan's almost.
I was going to say, we should have been allowed back in.
1994, you know, so for me that's really pleasing to see that it's having an impact, you know, and people are interested in it and find it an easy read.
Well, I think it's a very accessible book.
Good.
And I think, you know, the way it's done, it's the kind of thing that people will pick up, I would imagine, in you know, in Watson's or whatever.
Aye.
And it's got, I didn't know any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, why is it you think we don't know any of this stuff? Obviously, it was not taught to us, but you know.
Well, I listen to Tom Devine speaking quite a lot. I mean, his new book, Scotland and Slavery, about amnesia. You know, and he speaks about, there's a famous quote. He says in the 1960s, some big research professor said that the history of Yorkshire had more written about it than the history of Scotland.
Wow.
So I think part of it is the immaturity of Scottish history as a discipline.
Right.
You know, so I think Scottish history in general, and maybe it's certainly grown up with Tom Devine's career.
Yeah.
You know, maybe the last 25 years or so. So I think that's been one part of it. It's the immaturity of the discipline in general.
Yeah.
But in particular, I think this area has been mostly written about from an English perspective. So
not just that we weren't taught this material, but actually, you know, at schools for most of the 20th century, we weren't taught any Scottish history, really.
No, you're right. I didn't get taught Scottish history at all at school. You know, we did, we get taught about the Tolland Man, which is a bog body in Denmark in history. We done a bit of the World Wars. You know, so I had to go to university to actually do Scottish history, and then that's what really gave me the interest about what I was wanting to do.
It's very similar to how I kind of got into Scottish literature, because hardly taught any at school, and then I had to go to university to find out what was out there. So that was how the book came about. It's got some fantastic images of this area. Tell us a little bit about the history of the merchant city as linked to the slave trade.
Now that's an interesting point. As I mentioned earlier, you know, I was at Strathclyde in the merchant city, you know, and had no understanding of it. So you do get an understanding what actually is a merchant city. Yeah. They don't say slave merchant city.
No, they wouldn't.
They don't. They don't say slave produce merchant city. So then you do start to think about, you know, how did the merchant city come to be? Well, the merchant city, as we know it, didn't exist before 1711. You know, so this would have been a semi-rural region. This is the medieval centre of the city, the High Street, the Cathedral, Old College was just in this street as well, going down to the Salt Market. So this is the medieval heart of the city. But this part of it here, now known as the New Town, didn't exist before 1711. There's a very important colonial townhouse called the Shawfield Mansion. Right. Was built by for a Daniel Campbell, who was a commissioner at the Treaty of Union. He was also an indentured servant trader in Montserrat and a sugar trader, and you know, he really epitomises the colonial elite in Glasgow, the mercantile elite. So he builds this Palladian townhouse, and really important style of architecture. This Palladian style of architecture, influenced by Palladio was a Venetian, so it's classically influenced. Okay. And it really sets the architectural motif in Georgian Glasgow, and indeed Britain, because this is the prototype colonial townhouse. The architect Colin Campbell, he then takes his, he publishes Vitruvius Britannicus, which is an architectural manual, and you know, this Palladian style is
this is a kind of template for what will happen in the rest
Definitely.
Of the country.
So all the tobacco lords copy it in Glasgow, all the big townhouses, you get three big ones. You know, you've got the Shawfield Mansion, then you've got the Virginia Mansion, which is built with the Buchanans in the 1750s, and then you've got the Cunningham Mansion in 1778 for William Cunningham. Then you see, not only do these merchants and slave traders, tobacco lords and sugar traders, they don't just set architectural styles, but they're having a really profound impact on the urban layout. So if you think the Shawfield Mansion was in Glasford Street, right, then the Virginia Mansion, which is a direct replica, the Shawfield sets a point of view precedent where you have a large colonial townhouse at the end of a walled avenue, gated avenue. If you think of Glasford Street and then Virginia Street, the two streets are built perpendicular. Yep. So it sets this urban grid in the merchant city. You know,
the kind of grid system that we have now.
Sometimes known as the tooth comb.
Right.
So these guys with their mansions and their gated avenues, they're really setting this grid. Sometimes compared to New York, if you think of that grid system as well. So
you had these fantastic houses basically at the end of these long ways. So wherever you were coming up to them, you could see this thing at the end.
Definitely, aye. It's this large townhouse. So if you think of Glasford Street, would have had apple trees. Wow. Orange trees, you know, your deer running up and down this avenue. You know, this this is about conspicuous consumption. You know, it's about an ostentatious display. I'm a colonial merchant. this is how I live, you know, and this is the Palladian townhouse. So the model is, if you have the Palladian townhouse, you know, the counting house where the business is done in the merchant city, you know, where the clerks would be working, dealing the tobacco, the sugar, the cotton, and then you would have the landed estate, you know, maybe 10 mile outside of Glasgow. That's your typical model for your successful colonial merchant.
And so why Glasgow? Why did it become so successful August 1st?
I think the river, of course, the River Clyde. It's the River Clyde, and then the cathedral, and then the university. You know, so the irony is, you know, we've then got the Old College, now the University of Glasgow. You know, this merchant city is based on the back of New World slavery. There's no two ways about that. The tobacco, sugar and cotton. Yet at the same time, the university is then, you know, it's providing a philosophical critique of slavery. So I think it's about this commercial town that's grown up. I should qualify it and say that the larger ships don't actually come into the city centre, so they would have used Port Glasgow and Greenock.
Did they widen the Clyde? Am I right in thinking at one point?
They did. Aye, they dredged it, and they widened it quite a bit, you know, to take some of the boats. But the larger seagoing vessels would have still docked at Port Glasgow and Greenock. Then the produce would have been landed, and it would come up to the city centre as we know it, the Broomielaw. And Gabbart boats, Gabbart ships, which is shallow bottom ships, you know. Right. So the hogsheads would have come up there, landed at Jamaica Street, brought up to Argyle Street was the main thoroughfare. They would have been weighed at the Tron Gate. Tron means public way beam.
Oh right, wow.
So they've been weighed there, and then this direction where we are right now, just off the High Street, there would have been numerous warehouses up here. So that's how the trades would have happened.
It's interesting that, you know, the Clyde and shipbuilding, and it's become to have this mythology in Glasgow that it's where the heart of the labour movement and all those things. A lot of positive things you've spoken about, the university, the college being built up, but yet the reasons that these things became as big as they were was kind of on the back of the slave trade.
Definitely, you know, and I think that's part of the back to this amnesia is, you know, we prefer to see Scotland as, you know, associated with, you know, Red Clydeside, and Glasgow in particular, you know, the labour movement, radicals, you know, so there's this, you know, rich historical tradition of challenging injustice. Yeah, at the same time, you know, I think it's, you know, it's been quite easy to forget, you know, the impact of slavery has on it. I think it's still quite uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's certainly still a politicised issue. You know, and it's got the capacity to generate newspaper headlines every so often. But we shouldn't forget, you know, I always qualify any talk I'm doing, or any tour I'm doing, you know, there's the good news and there's the bad news. I gave you the bad news, which is the quite profound involvement with Caribbean slavery, New World slavery. But we've also got, you know, a really powerful and committed abolitionist movement as well, which is philosophical. In the university, 3 scholars, Francis Hutcheson, Adam Smith and John Miller, 3 of them are working in the university and teaching, you know, an anti-slavery critique, for a moral critique and an economic critique, in particular with Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. So then it becomes like a political movement as well, and you get numerous anti-slavery societies in Glasgow as well, which really fits in with a, you know, a convenient identity that, you know, this radical tradition of challenging injustice. So I always qualify the bad news.
So you touched upon the tours that you do. Tell us a little bit about those. Do you still do them?
I do them sometimes. It started off with Doors Open. Festival, Doors Open Week, Doors Open Weekend. So that was the Glasgow Building Preservation Trust.
Yeah, that's when they opened a lot of the classic buildings that are shut most of the year to let people.
So it's in September, so I still keep them up. Black History Month as well, which is in October. I've been doing them for, well, since 2007 now, so that's about my era, bit of a veteran now. But also the Merchant City Festival has been really good as well, you know, so they contacted Doors Open and says, you know, we're looking for some new material. So I was commissioned by the Merchant City Festival a couple of years, and in fact then I met, you know, people who were involved with the Commonwealth Games. That led into that, you know, so that led to my involvement last year with the cultural programme. Well,
let's move on to last year, because it was a very busy year for you, I know. It was the year of the Commonwealth Games, and you determined, I think, along with some other people, that this story would be told alongside all these people coming here again, Glasgow having a particularly welcoming. I mean, it was a big success, I think, in terms of how Glasgow was viewed.
Yeah.
And I think for the first time for many people, this story was able to get out there. How did you go about doing this? Because I would imagine that there was a lot of people involved with the Commonwealth Games that wouldn't want this story told.
I suppose it's an uncomfortable narrative, but really the credit is with Louise Welsh and Jude Barber. You know, they had the real idea of this Empire Café. And Louise and Jude had worked on a project before, the Merchant City Soundscape, so it really evolved for that. They knew the expertise was in Glasgow. They knew I was working on it. They knew I was doing the academic research, just completing the PhD at the time. So, you know, they had the organisational knowledge and experience in what they were wanting to do. You know, obviously Louise has had a long number of years involvement in Book Festival, so it was a marvellous platform. So I didn't have any involvement in that side of it, so really the credit's with them on that. But you know, for me it was providing the historical advice, and you know, a couple of
you were
the
on
events
stage
were
a few
great.
times. You were on stage talking about it as well.
It seemed to be, you know, I was right there. Stephen will speak. And one of the nicest moments, I mean, there were some flowers for Louise and Jude at the end, and I got the pleasure of gate crashing. Louise was just going to go on the stage, and I was told got on the stage before her, and then I was on presenting, and you know, it was really good. It was great for a historian, you know, so you do this research in archives, you know, and you write some academic paper and 12 other historians read it, you know. So the public impact of that for me actually to speak in conversation with the Glasgow public was really marvellous. It was complemented as well with, there was a play, Emancipation Act, which was based in the book. So, I mean, this is pretty much Hollywood for a historian.
I know, for an academic, it really is.
So,
but what I should say, I mean, we spoke to Jude and Louise before it, and to kind of, you know, hopefully get a few people there. And what we should say now that it's happened is it was a huge success. I mean, it was busy. A lot of things, you know, you could have. It was in what was the name of the building that it was in?
The Brigate. Merchant Steeple.
That's right. Fantastic space. The cafe that they had there was great. The speakers, you know, they had people that came from all over the Commonwealth, didn't they?
Definitely. I mean, it was a really, really well thought out concept. You know, they had obviously put a lot of thought into a number of different things. You know, the goods in the cafe and stuff were fair trade. You know, everybody was getting paid as well. You know, they had, you know, there was a proper representation of, you know, every former British West India colony. You know, Trinidad, Jamaica. You know. There's proper gender balance and speakers, you know, so it was really a marvellous, well thought out concept. You know, they had like their own teacups made, and I'm now the proud owner of a nice Empire Café teapot. You know, so it was really, really a well thought out concept, and I think a lot of people appreciated, you know, the thought that went in it, as well as the academic content. You know, there was quite a lot of high profile speakers.
It really was
on a number of different challenging issues, particularly the museums. The museums night was one that seemed to strike home with everybody. So
and land ownership as well, and you know, there was a lot of hot topics. And what was great was that it wasn't, as you say, it wasn't just an academic audience or even like a cultural, not even just people that would normally maybe go to hear poets read or something. People were coming in off the streets because the city was buzzing anyway, and I think a lot of people had their eyes open.
Definitely. I mean, I felt that the city was alive. I didn't actually see any sporting events. So I just went to the Empire. I was there every day, the Empire Café, you know, and had a few good nights and after in a pub sometimes, and you know, so there was a real, you know, it was a really marvellous experience, you know, to speak about your own research. There's a you know, an interested audience, you know. It's
great to be able to do that. And hopefully we recorded at least one of the nights there, which we've still got to put out, so hopefully we'll be able to do that fairly soon. There was also last year an exhibition at the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery. Were you involved in that as well?
Was that the one in October?
Yeah, I think it was.
Well, that was the exhibition.
One that had the exhibition that had a lot of the pictures that are in the book.
Well, that was where the book evolved for.
Right.
That was the project that started in 2007. So that was the exhibition in the Heritage Guide. So that's now run, or at least it's stored by an organisation called CREA. They used to be Glasgow Anti-Racist Alliance, who were our original partner in the first project. I worked with them for a few years, so it's still there. you know. So 8 years later, it's looking, you know.
Is it still on the go?
It's still on the go 8 years later. So that was it's in the Kelvin Grove every year in Black History Month.
Right, okay.
It needs a wee bit of tape here and there, you know. It needs a wee bit of TLC, you know. But it's still there. So.
It's a terrific exhibition. I think for anyone who knows the city particularly, but even if you don't. We've talked a lot about Glasgow, but what about the rest of Scotland at this time, when Glasgow was, you know, filling its boots due to tobacco and sugar and the like?
No, that's an interesting point. The academic research I do is obviously, the PhD was focused on the Glasgow West India merchants, plantation owners and sojourners. Sojourners are temporary economic migrants who go to the Caribbean, so my period was just after the American War, 1776 up to 1846, so you got a few big events in there. Obviously Glasgow is the transatlantic hub, you know, so you've got all these merchants in here, a lot of the finance is coming in here, they're starting new industries, it's providing employment. So the argument is, you know, is it just Glasgow that's profiting for the new world trades? But I think these sojourners, you know, the research I've did, I mean, I was in the Caribbean for a month last April. I was in Jamaica for 3 weeks, and then Grenada, so I was there for just over a month. And basically I was looking for Scottish. Usually the typical model is these are young Scottish men, sometimes 20 to 25, you know, they're single, they're getting a commercial education in Glasgow, you know, accountancy, bookkeeping, and they're going to the Caribbean to advance their fortunes. You know, the difference between the North American settlers, you know, they're temporary, the sojourners, they're the guys that are going to the Caribbean, they're going there to further their employment, earn as much money as possible and come back. All the research I'm doing, you know, I maybe discovered about 70 or 80 examples of these guys, and I've probably got about 100 of them overall. But I looked at their residency status. Only a minority of them were coming from Glasgow.
Okay, that's interesting.
And Edinburgh. So a lot of them were coming from the northeast of Scotland, some from Banff, some from Aberdeen. You know, so these guys are coming to Glasgow. They're leaving for Port Glasgow and Greenock. They maybe be going in the merchants that are based here, their ships. But they're coming from all over Scotland and they're sending money back, you know, and if they're dying they're sending money through executors, or else if they're coming back, the ideal model for them is go to the Caribbean, earn as much money as possible through, you be an overseer, then perhaps an attorney watching a couple of plantations, and then become a slave owner yourself, ideally a plantation owner for their point of view, because that's where the money's to be made. I think the merchants in the Caribbean are making the most money, but then they're sending this money. The ideal for them is to come back to Scotland.
So the idea was never to really settle there and improve the Caribbean. It was to come back and show off your wealth, or at least improve, for some of them, improve their surroundings back here. Definitely,
and that's the difference between the immigration to North America and Canada, for example. You know, these are white settler communities, but further south into the Caribbean, it's make as much money as possible, this mindset, and then come back and buy a landed estate in Scotland. I think only a minority of them would have done it, you know, but certainly, I mean, I was interested in the wee guys.
Yeah.
You know, I was not interested in the merchants who are, you know, leaving the big wills and inventories, although they were important as well. But I was interested in the carpenters, you know, the masons, the tradesmen who were just going and they were sending money. I mean, this one guy from Banff, he had sent 35 years an average annual wage, a carpenter in Glasgow. He sent that home to his mum, and when he died it was in his bank balance and his mum had been using it, and I thought, you know, they're earning this cash that's no offer in Scotland, you know, and they're earning it quickly, and they're sending it back, and it's really, really hard to quantify this. I mean, how do you quantify, you know, the impact on somebody's family, improving their position down the generations? I mean, this money is, well, it's Scottish, any Scottish land or Scottish industry or vicinity with families. Nobody knows, you know, so it's really an invisible stream.
I mean, that is something that you don't really think about. You think of these merchants, and particularly when the exhibition was on, you saw these, you know, depictions of these guys in paintings or whatever, and they were dressed like, you know, new romantics, you know, the best gear and all this. But of course, for this to work, you need people to build houses, you need people to till the land, who, you know, or at least look after the people who are tilling the land. All of those things, and of course they would probably be paid, you know, in comparison to what they would get here. A kind of gold rush in a way, but unfortunately not the gold.
Well, it's white gold, which is sugar, and black ivory, which is unfortunately enslaved people, women and children. They're the labour force, but these guys are and the plantation infrastructure. You know, these guys are the management structure, if you like, and they're also providing the skills and the experience for, you know, as you say, to build up the plantation infrastructure. There are also some distillers in that as well. You know, so it's these are early modern. The plantations are early modern farms and factories in one, and it's based on obviously exploitation. But the money they're earning, you know, they don't get it here.
Yeah, sure. So when they come back, do other people take over this land that they've been working on in the Caribbean, or I mean, what happens? What's the legacy in the Caribbean in that way?
It's quite a high death rate, so some of them wouldn't have made it home. Somebody's need to do a study on a huge big sample, but you know, a lot of we don't have a strike rate, but certainly some of them are dying in the Caribbean. But in Jamaica in particular, I mean, this is a Scottish colony, so they think a full 1/3 of the white population in 1774 are Scottish or of Scottish descent. Wow. So if you think of Scotland's 10% of the British population at the time, you know, we're disproportionately represented in Jamaica in particular. So these Scots go out and they operate in clannish networks. You know, so through patronage and through I've looked at some sources here saying, you know, these Scotsmen are friendlier than other nations.
Right.
And it says, and I haven't seen one guy coming out here called Mac that doesn't have a letter of recommendation from some excellency or another. So they're very, very well connected, the Scots.
Okay. You
know, and some historians have argued they operate like other ethnic minorities, such as the Jews, for example. You know, so they operate in wee networks amongst themselves. So if one Scots guy would have died, or go home, you know, another Scot would probably get promoted.
Which probably could come from the clan system, or that would be, you know, it's something similar, you'd imagine.
That's Douglas Hamilton's argument.
Okay.
About 10 years ago, Scotland, the Caribbean and the Atlantic world, which was based on his PhD at the University of Aberdeen in 1999. So he's made an important you know, argument about the networks. And also an earlier historian, Alan Carris, looked at the Scots in Jamaica and Virginia. So these Scots are definitely, they're going out there, they're operating these clanship networks, making the money, and then coming back, or hopefully
coming back. Before we started recording, you were saying that the book that influenced you had kind of been attacked over the years, but now was perhaps coming back into fashion. Just talk us a little bit about that.
Well, the main book that really had a huge impact on me was Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery. It was based on his PhD thesis in 1938 at Oxford, which was almost unheard of because he was Trinidadian. He was a black Trinidadian. His mentor was C.L.R. James. Right. So the two of them are friends, although they eventually fall out. But certainly C.L.R. James said that Williams stole his idea. Okay. C.L.R. James obviously literary, but Williams put it in academic research, and he did a lot of research. But he's continually attacked. His big argument is that, you know, the New World slavery powered the Industrial Revolution in Britain. Basically was the principal determinant. So a lot of quantitative historians since have, you know, took him to task for sometimes exaggerations, you know, arguing beyond the evidence. But I think he was striking at the ideological heart of the British Empire. I mean, here was this black Trinidadian in Oxford, you know, the heart of the academy. And he was there making this important argument. So it's still influential. I mean, historians still cite it today. I mean, it was published in 1944 originally, you know, and historians still cite it. I mean, I made it a point here to get a signed copy of it. So I went on to books last year and seen a signed copy for £100, which was a real bargain. He actually went back into politics after his thesis. He taught at universities in the States, but he went back and became the Prime Minister of Trinidad. So the signed edition I've got is it's a telegram for the Trinidadian press office when he's Prime Minister, and saying, here's your copy. The book that you sent to Eric. So £100, I mean, that was a real bargain. So it had a huge impact on me. A lot of the work that's been done in the impact of New World slavery has been done in an English context. Right. You know, so there had been very little written on, you know, the economic impact of slavery in Scotland. But Tom Devine's most recent thesis is, did slavery make Scotia great? Yeah. So really I was trying to answer it with a regional study. Okay. And this book had a huge influence on me.
You said briefly about the at the Empire Café, the discussion on museums was, you know, quite a hot topic. Why would that be?
Well, the point I made, basically, during my PhD research, I went to Bristol, London, and Liverpool.
Yeah.
And you're naturally drawn to the museums when you've got some spare time. So.
And these are cities that actually, in that time, have more in common with Glasgow than perhaps other Scottish cities in a way, because of their port status. Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, certainly Bristol and Liverpool.
They're all Atlantic ports, right?
Yeah.
They've all got direct access to the Atlantic and the Caribbean and North America. So the difference, that's the similarities, but the differences is London, Liverpool and Bristol have got direct involvement in the triangular trade voyages, quite substantial in Liverpool's case, whereas Glasgow has got limited involvement in the slave trade. There's only 31 recorded voyages between 1706 1766. When you compare that to Liverpool, for example, they send out over 1,000 in a 10-year period after 1790. But I think this is one of back to the amnesia, this is one of the reasons why we always see the slave trade as a problem for England, but at the same time it means we've minimised the impact to the actual plantation economy. So the Glaswegians didn't have involvement with the slave trade, they just went directly to the plantations, so they've got their connections. So the three museums that I went to, you've got the Georgian House, which was a slave owner, John Pinney. His museum, or his house, has been turned into a museum in Bristol. You've got the M Shed, which has got a plaque up acknowledging the city's involvement with slavery. Liverpool, of course, has got the International Slavery Museum. London's got the Sugar and Slavery Permanent Exhibition. It struck me that out of the four Atlantic ports, only Glasgow was the only city that's museum didn't have either a plaque or a permanent exhibition up. So I made this point at a National Union of Journalists conference during Black History Month a couple of years ago. And it seemed to strike a chord that night. It promoted a lively debate, and then it got taken on by my friend Dr Michael Morris, who's now at John Moores Liverpool University in Liverpool. Michael's a great friend, and the two of us have been doing this. He's more literary, but he's cultural history, whereas I'm economic history, or economic and social. So Michael took this on. It was Michael's idea that night at the museums to have a debate on it, and the reason why does Glasgow museums why is New World Slavery, why is it not properly represented? And it got taken on, and there has been quite substantial movement since. It's been recognised that that this is a conversation that's happening. So the museum's discussion was really useful.
And do you think that this situation will change? Are there any plans for it to change?
Well, the Georgian Glasgow exhibition last year, which was really important. We are a mutual friend. He's been doing some great work up at Glasgow, and so the important part from our point of view, the University of Glasgow, myself and Simon Newman, professor in the history department, were providing advice on the slavery part of the exhibition. So that was a small important step, because Caribbean New World slavery was certainly represented there, so we felt that was really useful. We've also been working on some podcasts as well that are going to be up in the next couple of years with the Kelvin Grove. We've got a team of historians and everybody to speak in their specialism. I spoke on a silver punch bowl, which was great because alcohol has got real significance with these West India merchants in Glasgow. The Glasgow punch is a that's not an actual punch, but
I think I've seen that a few times.
I've seen that a few times, a different type of punch. Well, they made up a thing called the Glasgow Sherbet, which was basically an early form of lemonade. They have lemon and lime for the Leeward Islands. They mix it with cold water and sugar, muscovado sugar, and they mix it up. You need to get the proportions right. I've tried to make it myself and I can't do it. But then they would mix it up with Jamaica OP, which is overproof rum. So they would, and then it was called the Glasgow Punch. But they would have a toast as well. The trade of Glasgow and the Outward Bound. And as soon as the toast gets said, the guys would go and get the punch bowl. The women had to leave the room, and they would sit and drink that. So I spoke on just the symbol significance. Alcohol, so I think that the museums are certainly provided, but it's an important platform. The Kelvin Grove is one of the most visited attractions in Great Britain. This is how Glasgow struts its stuff. So for there to be a silence about the city's long involvement with New World slavery tells us something, but now it also tells us something that this conversation's happening. And the museums are being flexible enough in trying to represent it, so they're doing a good job.
There's a quote in the preface to your book, as you say, from the Glasgow Anti-Racist Alliance, that an improved understanding of Glasgow's past will help create a better anti-racist future.
Mhm.
And do you think that is the case?
It's an interesting point. It's actually the foreword by Jack Harrier,
Right.
the director. It's another one of Eric Williams' thesis, is that racism wasn't the cause of slavery, it was the consequence.
Right.
Because he's seen, expropriation of labour in the New World. At the start it was, he says it was white, brown and then black. It was your white indentured servants, it was your brown Indians, and then it was black Africans. So Eric Williams seen that slavery then provided, there was an ideology of slavery, and then it dehumanised black people into chattel property. So then it's, the long-term legacy of that is racism today. So I think, certainly as a historian, you're always thinking that if your history would have, an impact in the contemporary period. And I think any understanding of the past, if you can see where this comes from, you can see the real absurdity that the African people are, in any way inferior at all. If you can understand how this, appalling, really nefarious ideology was created, then I don't know, you would like to think that people would learn from it.
I would hope so. I thought it was a very interesting quote, because I think people that read historical books often don't think that they have any impact on today, but actually I think, in fact, a lot of the stuff you've spoken about, I'm thinking, the people leaving Scotland to make their money and then coming back has a contemporary context as well.
Well, even the most appalling terms that we still use today, I mean, real racist terms come from that period. Yeah. So there would be specific terms for specific types, of slaves, and that there's still racial insults today. And if people had a greater understanding about, how this was actually put together, you would like to think that maybe in a couple of generations, you'd like to think, younger people learn.
Education is the key.
Education's the way forward. At numerous different levels. I mean, you're germinating future research careers if you're putting in this at the school curriculum. And you're giving people an understanding. We're all humans. We're all human beings. We're all family.
Exactly. You spoke a little bit about the reaction at the time, the kind of philosophical reaction from Francis Hutcheson and Adam Smith, who I always think Adam Smith gets a terrible, picking for, apparently influencing, future Tory economic policies. But actually, if you read his stuff, he's a liberal writer, I would say, in the broadest term of the word.
As soon as David Cameron gives you your book the thumbs up, then that's it.
It's a bit like seeing you like the Smiths and expert. I'm going to go into my records now. But at the time, there must have been people, abolitionists, who were in Glasgow who were reacting against what was going on.
Well, the interesting point with Smith, he's writing a qualified critique of slavery. He's just saying it's unprofitable. He's writing some moral critique, but he's obviously writing Wealthy Nations, 1776. The thing is with Smith, he's friends with tobacco lords as well. And I think a lot of his evidence came from Andrew Cochrane, who owned plantations in North America. So, Smith's playing a double game. He's part of the elite in Glasgow. So they'll be doing the gentlemen's clubs, and he probably the Hodgepodge Club, one of these type of clubs. So he's friends with your tobacco lords, and he's picking that up. But he's saying slavery is unprofitable. But that's a micro level. Really at a macro top level, he's saying the empire itself is a drain, the colonies are a drain. He says the money that's getting made, the government will have to put money in, the naval investment for example. He says, but the money that's coming back through the high taxes, it's the British public that are paying for it, the high taxes in sugar, cotton, sugar in particular, it's going into the hands of a few special interests, your merchants, your plantation owners, your absentees. So he's making this big argument, but the thing is, the abolitionists all cite him. So Pitt the Younger, the Prime Minister in Wilberforce, there's one example. Smith goes down to see them in London, and he comes into the room and they say, well, you sit down before us because we're your scholars. Wow. So certainly Adam Smith had a really profound impact in the abolitionist movement, and abolitionists are citing it because this is where they're hitting the merchants where it hurts. If Adam Smith, the leading authority on the global economic system, and saying this is unprofitable, so there you go, there's the information here, this is an unprofitable system. So I mean the moral argument, because it isn't quantifiable, is almost put aside. Say, well, I can say it's not, you're going to lose money if you do this.
So any moral any moral reaction as a side issue to it almost.
I don't think the merchants would be bothered. They're making the cash anyway, your planters, but it's more the abolitionists were really smart propagandists. So then they were taking this information to the, not just the Glasgow public, but this was a nationwide movement. So they're saying, this is an unprofitable system. It's based on, exploitation and death. Here is the evidence.
Yeah.
Before probably about 78 into 1780, before that, the general public had little idea what was going on.
Yeah.
So the abolitionists really put that on the map. And they're smart. They're producing, economic tracts, and they're compiling dossiers of empirical evidence. Collected in some of the Atlantic ports, and then they're taking it through Great Britain. There's a remarkable guy, 1792, William Dixon, travels Scotland with a body of evidence. And then what you see the Scottish public challenging it through petitions. A good book by Ian White, Scotland Abolition of Black Slavery. It tells you about the petitioning for Scotland. So certainly these guys are influenced by Adam Smith. So there's a philosophical underpinning to it that is a political challenge. There's also a legal challenge, which fits right nicely with my new project on runaway slaves.
Which I was going to ask you about. So the perfect time to do that.
Now, the runaway slaves, there's one strand of thought that a lot of black people are brought back to Great Britain in the 18th century. The naval captains would be bringing them back, plantation owners or absentees would be bringing them. So a lot of them would be living in big houses, but some of them actually challenged their status, their unfree status, and run away.
Okay.
So the famous one example we've got is Joseph Knight.
Yeah.
In Scotland.
James Robertson's novel, which is about him.
Aye, it's a wonderful book. It's a great book, really fictional account of it, but it's obviously balanced in the court case. But there's other examples. Well, since I've started the new job in January, I've been looking through newspaper advertisements, London, Liverpool, Glasgow, Bristol. So you see these guys, and they're challenging. I mean, the high profile cases. The Somerset case done in England, 1772, the Mansfield decision, which is qualified. But then you've got Joseph Knight in Scotland, which is Joseph Knight's influenced by it. He thinks this is a national decision, no slavery in Britain, and runs away. He gets a more far-reaching decision in Scotland, no slavery in Scotland. So these runaway slaves, they're pointing out the anomalies between chattel slavery in the Caribbean, and servitude, indentured servitude in Great Britain. So it's getting abolitionist material as well. So certainly the runaway slaves is probably a good term for it. If you want to sit and have a real intellectual term for it, it'd be self-liberated, formerly enslaved Africans in Great Britain. That would be the way to look at it. So they're fighting against...
You can't put that in 140 characters on Twitter.
No, you can't. no, putting that on Twitter. No. So certainly they're fighting against their status. It's not just about acquiescence and taking this line down, subordination. These guys are fighting back.
So where are you hoping to go with the Runaway Slave project?
It's a 3-year contract, so I'll be publishing a few papers on it, minimum. I'm sure there'll be other academic outputs, but what we're trying to do, the most important thing that we'll be doing is trying to identify and photograph all newspaper advertisements of runaway slaves in Great Britain, so Bristol, London, Liverpool and Glasgow for obvious reasons. A lot of them are in Glasgow newspapers as well. So then we'll be putting it in a searchable database online. So that'll be one of the major outputs. So nobody's did this, and the thing is, the black voice in the 18th century is really difficult to try and record, but these newspaper advertisements gives us a rich source of data about injuries. Some of them get scars. Either plantation marks or country marks, which was their marks for Africa. Some of them get smallpox. Some of them have been branded. We'll get really detailed descriptions of their clothing, for example.
So this was all in the adverts that were being used.
It's the masters trying to get them back. As soon as their property's running away, there's an industry around about it. You've got slave hunters in Britain, so you get the runaways, making off, and then guys looking for them. So the rewards are usually in guineas, 5 guineas or whatever.
Depending on the state of the person and or the importance, and that's
the rewards are one of the things we'll need to try and work out. But certainly there's certainly an industry related to it. So it's a really wonderful project for me, because one of the criticisms that I've faced, actually my face, it was that night I spoke at the National Union of Journalists conference, or it was a one night seminar, and a woman asked me, and it was pretty much a curveball, you know, I don't think I'd been prepared for it. She says, right, you've spoke about the history of Glasgow and the economic development in Glasgow, which was, incidentally, that's what they asked me to speak on.
Right.
But so I spoke on it, and she says, so, and it was an African American woman, and she says, what about the slaves? And I was like, I mean, this was in public, you know, there's about 50 odd people there, and I'm like, says, well, you know, I've only got 100,000 words for a start. I says, but this is it's a different mode of historiography, you know, I'm writing about the economic development of Scotland, based on, I'm acknowledging this transatlantic slavery had a big impact. So this allows me now to turn it, I mean, I've wrote about the slave owners a lot, which really needed done.
Sure.
But now I can turn it and run about, I can, you know, examine, you know, the people who have been exploited.
So the slaves themselves.
And I go back to my first love, which is really social history. I mean, I was really interested in social history. That was the masters I did. I get sort of sidetracked into economic stuff, but you know, I can really get into the, you know, the real details about how people lived and that. So it's the social history I'm interested in.
I mean, it sounds to me like the economic history of that period was perhaps the best way in to looking at the social history as well, because it was such an important thing. And you know, I say, around here you can see it in every street, the legacy of that. You know, whether it's the street names or the buildings themselves. And you know, we're joking there about Twitter, but you can follow the project on @Runaway Slave GB.
You can.
So it is a Great Britain wide search. It's not just you know, looking at Scotland. So you're working with other universities in this, or?
Well, one of our big things we'll be doing is collaboration. You know, so especially there's a project, Legacies of British Slave Ownership at UCL at the moment. You know, so they've documented when slavery was abolished in 1834, compensations paid to slave owners by the British government for the loss of their property, which is of course men, women and children. So they've got a searchable database of every person who got, you know, compensation 1834, 1838. So a lot of them are for Glasgow. Glasgow is one of the largest regional groups of claimants in Britain, so we've got natural collaboration with them. Liverpool as well, you know, there's numerous academics working on this in a British context that we would be looking to be, you know, in discussion with. So it's great to be working in a British-wide context for me. You know, going down to London and spending some time in Bristol and Liverpool. I've already did it for the PhD thesis, so it's really, you know, just elaborating upon that.
Well, and I might be wrong about this, but if you weren't, you know, doing this, then perhaps Scotland again would have been kind of ignored, and it would have been focused on England. So I think it's great that it can be, you know, properly British wide. Aye,
well, that's good. You know, it's centred in Glasgow, and we're looking out. Usually they're big London centric projects.
Sure.
So it's really good to be doing it for Glasgow and you know, going down to England and you know, just providing this. I mean, it's a really important study, so and Scotland should be part of it.
Absolutely. Well, Stephen, I think we'll leave it there. And I'm quite in the mood for a Glasgow punch now, actually, now that you mentioned that.
See if we can get it on.
Well, yeah, thanks for coming.
Thanks very much, a pleasure.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.